Hello, hello. Good morning from yesterday, if that makes sense. I
Tomorrow
am
is the
Manila
new
Chan.
yesterday. Yesterday is the new tomorrow.
I am Manila Chan. That over there is Ted Rall. You are tuned in to the Ted Manila Information Show, otherwise just TMI for short, because we bring you too much information. We are not a button-down, straight-laced news program. If that's what you're looking for, this ain't it. So just a word of warning. We are normally live, like actually live, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So please be sure to like and follow this show, even though while you're watching this, Ted and I aren't actually here.
No, we're somewhere else, but who knows where? We don't even know, really.
Half the time I wake up, Ted, I'm like, where am I? Is this my life? Is this really my life?
Do you ever do the thing where you wake up in the morning and you kind of don't know who you are or what you are, like sort of like DOS, like booting up in the morning, like
yes,
like human.
When I stagger to the bathroom, I look in the mirror and I'm like, who is this middle-aged woman staring back at me? Like, what is this?
Yeah, I sometimes ask myself the same thing. Who is this middle-aged woman staring back at me? No, not really.
And then you roll out of bed, Ted.
Bum.
All right. So by the time you guys are watching this, you've already heard that there was this love fest phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump that took place. We teased it on the show on Tuesday because while Ted and I were on air, the phone call between Washington and Moscow happened. And it apparently went on for like 3 hours, Ted.
Yeah,
3 hours.
That's a long call.
Long time. That's a long call. But to be fair, there are translators involved, so that makes it takes longer when you have.
And as we've seen from Donald Trump's appearances, he can just run off at the mouth for hours
and say nothing.
And he can take a long time to say very little.
That's true. So to help us dissect all of this and what we should have expected, are we surprised? Are we not surprised? Who else for our 100th episode, Ted, are we going to bring on? Than
the one and only.
There he is.
There he is, our buddy, man of the hour.
Mark Sleboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. You guys know him if you guys follow this show. You can follow Mark. Speaking of following, follow Mark on Twitter, which I'm still dead naming, on Twitter at Mark Sleboda, the number 1, Mark Sleboda 1. Check out the YouTube channel, if it's still there, The Real Politic, on Telegram, same name, The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. Also on Facebook, /Gramsci, if you can't spell that, GRAMSCI.
If you can't spell that, just go back to school. Sorry.
So, no, that's fair enough. So, okay. Mark, you weren't there Tuesday morning. Ted and I were debating this. He called me a cynic, and admittedly so. That's fine. I'm a cynic. I didn't expect much to come from this phone call. I didn't expect peace to break out. And sure enough.
Mine says cynic right here.
Sure enough, it didn't break out. I mean, I know that, the at this point, the details are still emerging about exactly what these two men talked about. But what's the deal with this temporary kind of small package temporary ceasefire?
Okay, so first, Ted Manila, thanks for having me on. It is always an honor and a pleasure to be on the TMI show, and just generally, I enjoy chatting with both of you.
Okay,
really
likewise,
do.
Definitely.
We have a long history of it across multiple shows and years.
True.
So it's nice to keep up the tradition, even if we're not getting paid for it now.
That's right.
Second of all, may I just say I really dig your new intro. I saw it last time. I forgot to mention it. It's pretty cool.
I like it too.
I like it.
Thank you.
Third of all, in reference to waking up in the morning and looking in the mirror and not recognizing who you are or what you're doing there, if I may insert a cliched line from The Matrix, it's called mescaline. It's the only way to fly. Okay, so I chatted with our friend Jamarl about this also earlier today before we had it before the phone call took place, and yeah, I also severely disabused him of the notion that anything really momentous was going to happen. There was going to be, I know the New York Times and the BBC and the Economist were all billed was terrified. The Europeans are trembling at the phone call, right? They thought some kind of new Yalta conference was going to happen over the phone, that Putin and Trump were going to divide up Ukraine and Europe and I don't know, maybe the Middle East while they were at it. And then they were going to ban nuclear weapons. And they were all going to sing Kumbaya naked around a fire, right? You know, something. And I said, I'm sorry, this is a phone call, right? We're talking matters of high geopolitics and diplomacy. Trump may very well operate under the illusion that things can be settled if I can just meet with Putin and we can all just hash it out in a half an hour, and you know that sort of thing. Maybe that is his idea of diplomacy. The way he's been pushing for these personal phone calls and face-to-face meetings, while the Kremlin's kind of been like, there's a process. I understand that you Americans have not done any actual diplomacy in decades, right? But
True.
here, you know, we operate according, you know, and Russia has been through this before, or maybe you want to call it the Soviet Union, where Gorbachev got handshakes and promises and a wink and nods from Western leaders, and then, you know, they turned around. Russia is not going to consider anything closed unless, I mean, it's got legal documents with promises of firstborn child sacrifice to infernal deities upon non-payment and non-fulfillment and other matters, right? I mean, we're talking, we might as well call Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves, because we're going to need infernal lawyers if there's any actual agreement that is reached, right? Because they're going to have to, you know, witness and seal the contract in human blood, because Russia's not going to accept anything less at this point. First of all, they don't trust Trump. Why should we trust Trump? He just arranged a ceasefire less than 2 months ago upon coming into office with Hamas and Israel. He proceeded to arm Israel with 2,000-pound bombs and rearm them. And today he just greenlit the Israel breaking the ceasefire unilaterally, and the wholesale resumption of bombing of Gaza to the tune of hundreds of deaths. That doesn't speak much to the Trump administration's veracity or trustworthiness when it comes to ceasefires, right? Or you know, any you know, forget every, you know, also every other U.S. administration, the Kiev regime, the Europeans, you know, the both rounds of the Minsk Accords, solidified in UN Security Council resolutions, the Istanbul communique. I mean, we could go back decades with broken treaties and promises, and Russia's, you know, has very little trust, and it's, you know, it's not a matter of trust but verify. It's don't trust but verify and require the signing over of the firstborn child, right? I mean, that's where Russia is right now. So there was, I think Trump may be operating under the delusion that things can be settled in things like phone calls, but Russia has in their mind months and years of hard, painful negotiations ahead, if there is anything at the end of them. And if not, oops, we already overran Kiev on the battlefield. I mean, that's where Russia is. Russia has zero interest in a ceasefire. It's not going to happen. They said it for months. Every Russian leader, foreign minister, spokesman has said it repeatedly, and it still stands, right? Putin completely rejected the idea of a ceasefire in very polite, Socratic terms.
Wait. Completely, not completely, right? I mean,
Oh, yes.
what about the maritime and the energy and all that stuff?
Yeah, okay. There's nothing actually done with the maritime other than they agree on talking.
And
the energy and so there was a ceasefire apparently agreed. I don't know whether the Kiev regime has any agreement with it because the U.S. seems to be the negotiating on their behalf. But arranged between Trump and Putin that there will be an immediate cessation of attacks, supposedly on energy and infrastructure. Now, whether this ceasefire lasts a week with the Kiev regime, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, they're just this week have launched 3 drone attacks attacking civilian buildings. The civilian buildings count as infrastructure? I think they do, but also trying to hit oil sites and the like. But I mean, Russia
it's limited, right, Mark? It's limited ceasefire, limited to oil refineries. Limited. Don't strike oil refineries. Don't strike energy,
electrical systems and the like. Right. This is a bone that Russia can toss because they're pretty much already done with severely reducing the Kiev regime's electrical infrastructure. So they're happy to give this away at this point as a goodwill gesture to keep the Americans going and jawing and jaw-jawing, right? I mean, consider that a goodwill gesture. Russia is very interested in talking to the Americans. They're very interested in improving bilateral relations. In fact, as far as the Russians are concerned, these are 2 separate issues, right? Settlement of the Ukraine conflict and improving bilateral relations with the U.S. with only tentative potential overlap between the 2 of them, right? As far as Russia's concerned, well, we can never agree anything really on the Ukraine conflict, but still vastly improve relations with the United States and a walk back from the hair trigger nuclear Armageddon that we were at under Biden. That's I think where Russia is. Russia is. They're winning on the battlefield. They had a huge victory this week with a complete crumbling of the Kiev regime's positions in the Kursk region. Huge losses on the Kiev regime side. Huge loss of manpower, equipment, political face for Zelensky. They've got them on the run. They have several, I believe, very large offensives planned for once the ground firms up later in the spring. I think we're going to see big offensives from Russia.
Mark, Trump is asking Putin to spare the lives of the Ukrainians who have invaded the Kursk region of Russia. How's that going to look?
Okay, so first of all, it is unclear to me how many Kiev regime forces have actually been surrounded in the Kursk region. I think the number tossed around that there's thousands may be exaggerated, frankly. Their positions crumbled. A lot of them fled. I think most of them died. A lot of them died trying to escape in small groups as they fled their positions after Russia's pipeline special forces operation. I think that happened in the hours afterwards. Some of them did manage to get out, to retreat into. They basically hold at this point only 3 small hamlets, and not even all of those right on the border. And Russia already has positions in the Sumy region. And the Russian president has ordered the creation of a buffer zone in the Sumy region, i.e. Russia's going to take Sumy too. I mean, right now it's called the buffer zone, but I'm sure it will develop into more than that. I'm very much looking forward to the people's referendum in Sumy and the founding of the Sumy National Republic of the Russian Federation. But right now, I mean, as far as Russia is concerned, the Kursk invasion force are terrorists, right? Right. It's not being reported at all in the Western press. Of course, it is being reported in the Russian press about the number and the scale of atrocities that were committed by Kiev regime forces against the civilians. Still, I mean, a few thousand, right, is what we're talking. But a lot of them were older people. There's in many villages, they seem to kill all the men. They executed, they raped, they pillaged, they tortured. Maybe not all Ukrainian forces did this, but enough of them did. I think that it happened. It wasn't just a bad apple situation, right?
Right.
That Russia is out for blood, right? They have very little call for mercy. And yeah, Putin promised Trump that if they surrender, they will actually be treated according to the Geneva Convention rather than as terrorists. But Zelensky refused to order them to surrender. That's it. He refused. In fact, he even refused to recognize that they've been driven from the Kursk region, that there were any troops surrounded or taken prisoner. So, I mean, it's a joke. And Putin even extended this humanitarian gesture for President Trump to 6 o'clock local time on Monday morning, and that's already long past. So, I mean, that it's kind of a moot point already.
Well, I mean, meanwhile, Mark, little Volodymyr Zelensky was cruising around an Audi A8 in Finland as he arrived. As the call goes on, he arrives in Finland. Emmanuel Macron makes statements, saying that the French are ready to commit European peacekeepers to the region. Germany, I mean, this is all happening while Trump and Putin are on this 3-hour phone call, right? In Germany, their Bundestag says that they're going to commit like $500 million or something to new advanced weaponry, and they're going to continue supporting Ukraine. So whatever happens here in Washington, I mean, is whatever's happening in Europe even relevant to what was happening between Washington and Moscow? I mean, how much did the Europeans play?
Yeah, the Europeans are very much feeling like the unwanted third partner in a menage a trois, right? I mean, sitting on the side and watching and yeah. And Lavrov, in fact, earlier this week, the Russian foreign minister was asked by a journalist about Europeans' reaction and to U.S. and Russia talking, and he said, I'm really not that concerned about the Europeans' position or opinion on anything that's happening. In fact, I haven't paid a lot of attention to their opinion for a long time. But to be perfectly honest, they should, right? Because the Europeans seem dead set on and very much have the possibility to play spoiler to even any theoretical ceasefire or settlement being made by Russia and the U.S. The Europeans are promising right now. They're in the operational phase, according to the British Prime Minister Starmer, for the British and French and a supposed 27 other countries, although no one ever names what those other 27 countries are. They met in a virtual meeting, evidently. That they are going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, swinging right in after any agreement, right? And Russia's been very clear about what this means, right? And are you guys familiar with Key and Peele? Are you Key and Peele fans?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. If you were a comedic duo, African-American on Comedy Central, I really appreciated a lot of what they did. I like them. I think it's much better than Jordan's horror movies. But anyway.
I was going to say, he's ventured off into doing scary stuff now.
Yeah. I mean, not going to go into that. But anyway, I'm sure you guys remember the skits that involved Obama's anger management translator, right?
Yes.
All right.
I know
So
which exactly what I'm talking about.
While Putin plays the good cop with Trump and says, yeah, that all sounds great. It's a great idea in principle, right? Socratic method, but I have just a few questions, right? You know, this, right? Meanwhile, Medvedev is in a completely different vein. He is the anger management translator of Putin. He has become that. He has become Zhirinovsky 2.0. And his reply to Starmer and Macron's talking about putting troops on the ground, his first reply was, you can shove that idea back up the feces hole, right? I mean, he used the literal word there. That it came from, comma, diplomatically speaking. I appreciated the apostrophe, the comma, diplomatically speaking. I really appreciated that there. After that, he was a little more blunt, and he said outright, if any European country puts troops on the ground in number, you know, we all know they're under the guise of mercenaries and what special forces and ballet slippers on the ground or whatever, but in serious number, that it would be war. It would mean war, right? He was very, very frank about it. He said it would mean war. And they seem, I think, what they're building themselves up to, right? So I'm sure you've seen videos of hyenas, a pack of hyenas, trying to goad each other on to attack a lion or a honey badger or something like that, right? Now, first of all, I want to apologize to the hyenas because I'm going to completely disrespect hyenas here because I have infinitely more respect for hyenas than I do for the European leadership right now.
Probably fair.
Right. But they are trying to goad themselves on to attacking the lion or the bear, right? If you wanted a extended analogy there. Even if there is no ceasefire, right? Now, they do not envision putting troops on the contact line. They know, right, what the state of their militaries is and what capability they have there. They're talking about hiding troops back in Odessa and Lvov and Kiev. They're calling them new woke terminology they're using is reassurance force. I have no idea what that is, but let's be honest. They're human tripwires. They're human tripwires, right?
Yes.
First of all, they are sure that, and they're probably right, that if they keep threatening this, then Russia will never agree to a ceasefire. Right? I don't think they would agree anyway, but this makes certainly sure, right? So wait a minute. There's a ceasefire, and NATO then, even though they're losing, uses that opportunity to get what the whole war was about, and they put troops down in Ukraine, right? And Russia's just supposed to, take them. So that is, it gives
kind of like a
Russia,
human shield.
Yeah, a tripwire, right?
Yeah.
No, it's worse than that. It's not a shield, because the second chain of logic is that if Russia does attack them, their forces there, then they believe that whatever Trump is saying now, that the Americans will have to come to their rescue if they yell Article 5, which doesn't even technically apply, but, Article 5 really actually doesn't mean anything anyway. It doesn't specify any action. I mean, you could send a harshly worded letter, right, about the events, and that
support.
could mean Article 5.
Yeah, you're just supposed to consider it an attack on one. Considered an attack on all, but it doesn't say how you're supposed to respond to it.
A strongly worded email.
A tweet. But also, he's not a member of NATO. So that's
the Europeans are really hot for war. The Europeans are really hot for war right now.
But
even though they have no capability to wage it.
Right. I mean, but isn't that them being hot for war, figuring that they have their big brother, Uncle Sam, standing behind them to jump in?
Yes. Yes. And even though Trump says they're not going to be there, they refuse to believe that or accept it. They are living in a land of delusional reality, a propaganda bubble, just as severe as the one that Zelensky is living in at this point.
I mean, well, they say, Mark, that if you are a deep cover agent for long enough, right, you start buying into your role. Isn't that what they say? That you
Well,
start
that's obviously what happened to Zelensky.
Right. That like just there are
you internalize it all.
Right. You internalize and you start believing what you're portraying, even though you knew from the get-go that it was bullshit, but you start buying into it because you've been playing along for so long that now you're mixed up as to what's real and what's fantasy. And at this point, I mean, Zelensky thinks he's all powerful. I mean, you saw the way he came in with that kind of like chest beating bluster, and then JD Vance put him in his place. And and then now Europe, all of a sudden, Germany with their, new chancellor coming into office, and he's suddenly like, oh yeah, we're going to double down and we're going to lead the charge in protecting all of Europe because we can't count on Donald Trump. So it's going to be us, boys. What do you say? And I think he's still saying that in the back of his mind, believing that Uncle Sam is going to put the money behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
At least what they keep talking is an American backstop, right?
Right.
So if you remember that Starmer has signed 100-year security guarantee, 100 years of protection of Ukraine. There's just one little thing. In order to provide that security guarantee for Ukraine, the UK needs a security guarantee from the United States because they themselves have no military capability whatsoever. I mean, they aren't even a paper tiger because even according to their own assessment and reports on paper, the British military has deteriorated to just a joke.
Well, I think they have something like only like 250,000-ish or so military.
70,000.
What? 70,000. That's worse
73,
than I thought.
I think exactly. Yeah.
Holy moly. Ted's looking that up. That's okay. So all these guys, they said that Ukraine, I remember seeing some numbers that I think Ukraine had the most outside of the NATO countries, and all the NATO countries combined were very, very low numbers, unimpressive, versus Russia's 1.5 million active duty soldiers.
I mean, but more importantly, Russia has equipment, and Russia has ammunition, and Russia has artillery shells, and Russian troops actually have combat experience in modern peer-on-peer war, more so at this point than even U.S. troops do, far more actually than U.S. troops do.
Well,
right? So, I mean, they've created a monster, right? They keep talking about, oh, this has been great, we've weakened Russia. The exact opposite is true. Right. And a few American top military officials, like the U.S. Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe, Caviola, he's testified in front of the Senate. The Russian military is bigger and better armed now than they were in 2022 by a very significant margin. So, I look at even with U.S. full-throated military support under Biden, Russia has already deteriorated the Kiev regime's military down to the point where even if they got all the fictional imaginary weapons that the West doesn't have that they could dream up, right? Then still they don't have the manpower to use them.
Well,
right?
so that's what I mean. So Mark, I mean, so that's good background also. I mean, that's the situation on the ground. But I mean, even not even knowing that, it seemed pretty clear that the messaging out of Paris, London, and Berlin has been kind of trial balloony, like for domestic consumption. These are all three very weak leaders domestically. who are either lame ducked in the case of France, or who have weak coalitions in the case of Germany. And it seems like this is more about just sort of distracting from economic and other woes domestically. Like, I don't think they're really truly going to send, if Trump were to just cut the Ukrainians loose, I just don't see, the people of France in particular, or Germany or England for that matter, being willing to go to war for Ukraine.
Well,
they might be sympathetic enough to put a Ukrainian flag in their apartment, but they're not going to send their kid.
Here on the screen, I've got the list there, the visualization of how big the militaries are, the respective militaries are. Like, look at this: Russia, 1.5 million, and all this blue area. These are the NATO countries, and here's the big piece of NATO right there: the U.S., 1.3 million, Ukraine, 880,000, and France. Where's France? Where's France?
It's
France, right there, 200,000. And it says UK 184,000. I don't know if that's active, but I mean, Turkey, I guess, is second to the US. I mean, who knew? Spain, Germany. They're at 202 in Poland.
So,
but far and away the US.
You have to always consider how many of those are combat troops, right? I mean, that's the big question, because a whole lot of militaries are not actual combat troops.
Right.
Yeah.
Tons.
So Ted, I agree with the last half of what you said, but that's why I don't agree with the first half of what you said. I think they're perfectly serious, and this is definitely what they're saying is not for domestic consumption, because they know very well how unpopular this is, and it is unpopular with their own populations, right? No, the British people, the French people, the German people have no interest in going to war with Russia. But the British and French and the new German government coming in very much are, there, as long as they believe either that they have the U.S. supporting them, or that at least if enough of the Europeans. And there's some countries that have bowed out. Italy says, we want no part of this. Poland, surprisingly, one of Ukraine's biggest supporters, also said, we're not sending troops into Poland or into Ukraine, because they know how easily that can then become a war that involves Poland, because they're at the border right there. But I think these European elite, they cannot accept that they have lost to Russia. They have invested, first of all, on ideological and geopolitical grounds. Right now, they are far more orthodox believers in U.S.-led Western global hegemony than the current American government is. Right? And they think they can just wait Trump out, and another 4 years, there'll be another Biden, and the U.S. will be back to its proper hegemonic master form, right? That's what they're hoping on, at least, that they can just wait this out. Secondly, they just can't accept that they lose to Russia, right? They have their own form of exceptionalism, this messianic supremacist ideology, where they believe that they are societally, structurally, and morally superior to the whole rest of the world, right? That is the jungle garden narrative, ripped right from the top U.S. neocon Robert Kagan's own books, right? They have been mentally colonized by U.S. neocons, the entire European current crop of elite, Fizzo and Orban accepted. They cannot accept that they have lost to Russia. They just refuse to accept it, either in their heads or they'll what degree they will go to. And Macron is doubly furious. The French military and political elite is, at least within Macron's veins, not so much the far right and the far left, of course, but they regard Russia as being responsible over the last 5 or 6 years for them being kicked out of Africa, out of the Sahel, by all their former colonies there, and then them inviting Russia in. And I actually don't think Russia was very involved in any of that, but they were quick to exploit the situation.
Oh, for sure.
So they want vengeance against Russia. They are furious, right, for all of this. So they are just in a warmongering mood, right? You heard Ursula von der Leyen promise to rebuild Europe's militaries and military industrial complex to the tune of 850 billion non-existent euros. Where they're going to get this money from, I have no idea. And how, with a military industrial complex splintered among 20 or so countries, they'll never create a coherent, credible military force out of it, right? They won't.
Right.
So they're still living in fantasy land as well.
Well, so
and it has to be said, the Europeans do not have a warrior or a will to power mentality, right? They don't.
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They're in the last century, the last 2 centuries, certainly they conquered the world, but they don't have it now. Right. Not in defense even of their own governments. If you take a look at countless polls in Europe, most Germans would not fight to defend their own country, right? And that is the majority of European countries, much less fight for their country's geopolitical interests against Russia and Ukraine. So there's
you can look there, 182,000 forces in Germany. Canada, 68,000. That's it.
When you take a look at their own assessment and reports of their own military equipment, the state of, say, German tanks, right? They've got some 200 tanks on paper, and of those, it's like 30 to 50 of them are actually operational.
Wow.
It's really bad. They're all the European countries are in that state. They're really bad. France might be among the best of the European countries, and they're really bad. According to their own military's assessment, they have enough ammunition and munitions on hand for 2 days of high-intensity warfare with Russia. 2 days. That's all their military has left. That's according to their own military.
Well, that's
so.
There's
Mark,
a joke there.
To address something that we hear a lot, which of course doesn't. It has a internal contradiction. It's cognitive dissonance that Russia supposedly is about to crumble. The economy is falling apart. It's been destroyed in Ukraine, and yet.
Well, Mark, you had to be at a soup line earlier, right? That's why you couldn't join us.
And when I was, I guess
no soup for you. No soup for you.
My biggest problem when I visited Russia a couple of summers ago in stores was, waiting in line for all the people who wanted to buy stuff in front of me. But, so I guess the Russians are very good at propaganda, even internally, to the point of making people buy things they can't afford everywhere.
Ooh.
But I mean, but it's like we're being told that at the same time, this country that's at death's door is also about to invade Eastern Europe and Central Europe, and wants to, maybe Putin wants to ride a tank through the streets of Paris. How? I don't know. I just
how? What's the?
It's a low fat one over.
It's the duality, right? It's like it's like wait. They can't win in Ukraine. They can't win in Ukraine. Russophrenia.
Yeah. Russophrenia, the simultaneous belief that Russia is about to crumble and take over the world.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's the word that's been coined.
Oh, like schizophrenic.
They could not both be true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They just can't both be true at the same time. Like
you will have numerous people at Western think tanks funded by NATO and US aid who will argue that they most certainly can. Right? They will actually argue that point. I know because I've sat through when I was studying in London, academic meetings exactly on that at Chatham House, at the Institute, the International Institute for Strategic Studies. I've sat through those meetings before, right? They actually will argue that both of those things can be true. Don't look for contradictions or logic. They're not dealing in the real world. They are dealing in a world of their own beliefs, and their own beliefs no longer match up at all with reality, and they're not handling it very well. So they're doing and saying desperate and panicky things. Unfortunately, desperate and panicky people do stupid, reckless things. That's the danger.
So, Mark, during this 3-hour phone call, like I said, everything else was happening everywhere else during the phone call that revolved around these countries, right? So, in that time, also, I'm going to read from the Washington Post here. So, just as the phone call came to an end and it was hitting the media, Washington Post put out an article saying Trump terminates program tracking mass abductions of Ukrainian children. And you and I both know, we know a lot of these children were from the eastern Donbass regions where the children were actually evacuated into safety, into, the arms of cousins and aunts and uncles who were in Russia already. So, they're talking here. I'm going to show you on this tab, the Washington Post story. Observers fear the move has compromised evidence of war crimes by Russian officials and will hinder efforts to rescue thousands of missing Ukrainian children. And, way buried the lead way down there. They talk about how these children, some of them are legitimately orphans that have been, and Vladimir Putin has made the laws easier to adopt these orphan children. How dare he? All of this other stuff. But Trump has apparently gotten rid of these files, and they say it's him aiding and abetting Vladimir Putin in hiding Ukrainian children.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, full disclosure, my wife is Crimean, and we have family in Donbass, in Kharkov and Odessa, and so forth. So I am not an unbiased opinion here, but then again, I think I bring a lot of firsthand experience here. So this has to do with these absolutely bullshit charges that were brought through a Western-controlled international criminal court against Putin, right? So this is the actual substance of the international criminal charges against Putin. He's abducting East Ukrainian children. Let's translate that into reality. East Ukrainians who have been shelled, right, in their towns and cities by a West-backed putsch regime that seized power in their country. They were shelled for 8 years, right, with the U.S.-backed oligarch who was in charge of the Kiev regime, Poroshenko. This is on YouTube. You can look it up. He said, "We will win this war because our children will go to school and walk in the streets where their children will sit huddled in the basement hiding from our bombs and our artillery shells." He said exactly that. So this is East Ukrainians moving their own children and the children in the orphanages on their territory out of the range of the artillery shells and the HIMARS systems and everything else that Kiev was shelling their cities with, right? That is the reality of it. They moved them out of the range. And when there were certain cases of people then showed up and claimed those children, right? Most of this was arranged through the Kiev regime government. Russia gave them back, right? If the paperwork was all fine, there was lots of transfer of these people back. Now, if you think that this is a crime, then why wasn't a crime when the U.S. moved thousands of children out of Afghanistan, right? Because they did that. Why wasn't it a crime when the U.S. moved many thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of children out of Vietnam. There was even a name, Operation Baby Lift, right? But when the Russians move children out of harm's way, then it's evil, because they're going to brainwash these mostly Russian ethnic children into Russianness.
This is as much of a concession that you're going to get from Washington Post. It says Russia has long insisted it is moving children out of frontline areas to protect them, often sending them to summer camps in occupied Crimea or coastal regions of Russia. Ukraine describes the process of moving children to Russia as an attempt to erase their Ukrainian identity and indoctrinate them with Russian ideologies.
They're mostly Russian ethnic children because
they
from
speak
East
Russian.
Ukraine. It's the Kiev regime that is trying to forcibly West Ukrainize them, taking away their religion, their cultural rights, their political rights, their everything. It's such an inversion, a 180, or if you're Annalena Baerbock, a 360-degree inversion of reality.
This is like
it's actually
so bizarre. It is very bizarre that now they're saying that because Trump, how did they frame it? I got to go way back up here at the beginning of the article. The Trump administration has terminated a U.S. funded. We should point out, by the way, it's a U.S. funded initiative that documents alleged Russian war crimes, including a sensitive
Trump
data
administration decision here.
Yeah, like that's. Yeah. I think that's a move towards peace. No, I mean that you.
Yeah, it's a goodwill gesture by the Trump administration. It is, right? It is. They're trying to. They've done several of these things, right? That they're trying. There's also the point, of course, that most of these people involved in programs like this, like with U.S. aid and NED, the Trump is purging the government of people who are largely, shall we say, domestic political opponents, right? There's a little bit of self-interest involved here. He's not destroying U.S. aid in the NED, right? He's not getting rid of them. He's getting rid of most of the personnel and then rebuilding them up in the State Department under Rubio's direct control, right? I mean,
yeah.
A little bit of cynicism about what the motives of these things are. But sure, I think Trump probably understands, like anyone with a functioning brain cell, that this is a bullshit propaganda claim. And he's like Russia tossing a ceasefire of energy and infrastructure at this point. It's a bone. Both countries want to improve relations with each other. It's just coming to an agreement over the realities on the battlefield in Ukraine that is the difficult, if not impossible part.
Well, I mean, so what, as we wrap up this conversation, I think I'm still with you on this, Mark. I don't foresee anything happening until Vladimir Putin feels that he's achieved more of the SMO designs to begin with. But even if Ukraine plays ball according to Russia's rules and they cede over property and whatever and land to Russia, but then you have this rump state of West Ukraine, and those guys want to be, not only EU. That's fine, nobody cares. They join the EU. Go ahead. But then what if West Ukraine is still like, okay, well, you have your buffer countries now. West Ukraine wants to join NATO, and West Ukraine wants to make Stepan Bandera Day 365 days a year, and you can't do anything about it. Then what?
Yeah, that's the problem. Is the reality is that there is a Banderite fascist regime in power in Kiev, right? In the institutions, in the Rada, in the security services, in the police, in the military, right? It's a pervasive corruptive rot, right? That the primary component of this, you want to call it Galician idea of Ukrainian national identity is hatred of Russia and everything Russian, which means a good portion of Ukraine's own population, right? They have complete control. In fact, even Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty called Azov is only like the tip of the iceberg here, but Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in 2019 did an article saying that Azov was a neo-Nazi state within a state in Ukraine, right? Wow. I mean, yeah, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I know, shocked me too. But that was a more honest day and a reporter who was probably castigated for saying that even then. But even if they managed to get Zelensky out, that doesn't change the regime, right? Like trading Poroshenko for Zelensky, whom was in a sham election, right? A completely unfair election. With all the parties of East Ukraine, lustrated and banned and so forth, and all the leftist parties in the country. So there's no free and fair elections while this regime is in power there, right? But let's say they changed out the leader, just like the change from Poroshenko to Zelensky to, I don't know, Timoshenko or someone else would not change the nature of the regime. That's the problem. But with Russia doing what they are on the battlefield and what the Russian military is set on doing, there is only one person in the world that can save this regime from Russia, and that is Donald Trump. Any peace deal that he pushes, and let's say that Putin and the rest of the Russian government reversed everything they said and accepted a peace deal that kept this regime in power in Kiev. That's the problem going forward, is that's not going to solve Russia's security problem, and it is not going to bring peace to either Ukraine or to Europe.
Right. So what would be the solutions? I mean, how could there ever be an end to this war if even if you kept carving up Ukraine into smaller and smaller and smaller bite-sized pieces? I mean, there's going to be a fraction of that country, that Western rump, that are still going to be Banderites, that are still going to be hardcore Nazis, that are going to still be, still consider their Eastern neighbors subhuman, that are still going to,
It has to be said, there's enough of those OUN people in the U.S. and Canada too, right? Yeah, there's a large number. They control the Russian-Ukrainian lobby, right? Of what is believed about Russia in Ukraine. The Vindman and the Chrystia Freelands, right? That's all from that Ukrainian Banderite diaspora there, right? That has so the only real there's no good solution, right? There is no happy ending here, right? Even John Mearsheimer said that ultimately, right, it's going to be decided on the battlefield, and it will be a Russian victory, but it will be an ugly victory. Right? There is no happy ending here. There's only maybe less worse of bad options, right? I think that the best solution would be if negotiations go nowhere, frustrated by Russian demands, which they can back up on the battlefield, Kiev regime being unwilling to accept anything, and Europeans trying to disrupt everything. If Trump I tried my best, he blames it all on Joe Biden. Whether that's true or not is another question, right? Wipes his hands of the whole affair.
No, we got Mark frozen.
Uh-oh. Give him
give him a second.
Yeah, see what happens.
I see some movement. Maybe. He's coming back.
He wants to come back.
Slow-mo.
Walks away and lets Russia push all the way to Kiev or to the
Wow.
I think we timed out at an hour.
Yeah, no. So okay, what I think what you're saying is Trump washes his hands, walks away, and says, Vladimir, have at it.
Yeah. I think that is, I mean, I don't believe that can happen. I think it extremely unlikely, even for Trump. But
right,
if that would be the best solution, right? Because there is no real red line national interests that don't involve the pursuit of hegemony for the U.S. in Ukraine, right? It's far from them, right? It has no immediate impacts on them. And despite all the scaremongering nonsense out of Europe, Russia has no territorial designs on the Baltics or Poland. God, the last thing the Russian people want is have to deal with the Poles again. They're happy to tell the Europeans, the Poles are all yours. Enjoy them, right? They had enough. Right? None of that is real, right? The only real danger is Europe putting its armies in Ukraine or something similar happening in Moldova or Europeans trying to overthrow the government in Belarus. Those are the flashpoints, the Russian, the border.
Mark, we already see NATO fingerprints and the EU fingerprints messing around in Romania because they refuse to accept the election results because those damn Romanians keep electing the wrong person. The same guy. They keep wanting this Georgescu guy. And it's wrong. Don't they know that?
They've banned more than Georgescu, right? Because they also banned another conservative candidate who rose up to basically take the same position that Georgescu wouldn't. And what she has been banned for is for having a pro-Russian, anti-NATO opinion, which is a danger to Romanian democracy, right? Because that's what the danger to Romanian democracy is, not them banning political candidates for having an unacceptable foreign policy position.
That's wrong think. Obviously, you cannot have that right now. Look, I think the fastest and easiest way, if Trump really wanted to flip the world on its head, is say, hey, NATO, remember what I threatened back in 2016? I'm going to do it now. I'm out. And that's the end of it.
That would be a beautiful thing.
It would, but it's unlikely. Even for Trump.
It's unlikely.
I think that if he did that, I think I would start to seriously fear for Trump and J.D. Vance's life because they would have to take out both of them.
That would be true. But I think...
And Tulsi Gabbard probably too.
Well, yeah. We already know they don't like her. In all seriousness, if we wanted all of this to come to a complete dead stop, I mean, no pun intended there, but dead stop, end all of it, if the U.S. jumped out of NATO, it's over. The war is over. The threats are over. It's over. I mean, Russia would not have that fear. They're not going to fear 80,000 British troops. Like they're not.
Yeah. It's clear Trump is not interested in Ukraine. He doesn't even much like Ukraine, right? He's got more important countries to bomb, like Palestine and China.
Oh yeah, well, Iran. That's next on the to-do list. That's on the to-do list. Ukraine is passé at this point. It's nobody cares. Yeah. Just get it over with at this point. So I don't know. I think Mark, I'm with you. I foresee this going on until at least till after summer. And I think we are going to see at least one big major offensive in the summer when it's nice and hot before things cool off.
I disagree with you guys. I do. I think we're going to see a temporary ceasefire leading to an armistice. And I think Trump is pulling the plug. The Europeans are trying to throw a wrench into the works, but it won't work. And this thing is coming in for a happy ending.
I wouldn't consider any settlement that leaves a Banderite fascist regime in power in Ukraine a happy ending. Sorry. I've got family in Ukraine.
I hear that, but I mean, that may be, you and I both know the history of Ukraine. I mean, you know it better than I do. I mean, the right wing, far right extremism is baked in solid there.
Yeah.
I mean,
60 years of the Soviet Union couldn't
solve
cure
that problem.
Yeah. It's
I mean,
it's an unsolvable. It's a Humpty Dumpty.
If Russia occupied all of Ukraine and overthrew Zelensky, you'd still have that problem. I mean,
yes, you would.
Yeah,
there would be a guerrilla war.
Mm-hmm.
There would be a guerrilla war and civil unrest, and that would still be better at this point than the Europeans using that as a battle platform against Russia and educating every Ukrainian child to be the next warrior against Russia. That would still be better at this point, right? Because that is what they will do.
It took a long time to get this whole Banderite thing, to sweep across Ukraine, and it'll take a long time to deprogram this same thing and for the kids to sing Kumbaya and not hail
I think the price is too
Bandera
high.
songs.
I think the price is too high. Just like, it's not worth it for Russia.
It may not be worth it for you, right? But there's a lot of Russians with family in Ukraine, and it's our border, right? We can't have an ideologically anti-Russian people on our border who
but you
want
have
to take.
You have for years, for decades.
Oh, we have, but now they've been empowered and they've been metastasized to a power and a number in the last 8 years. Now,
the whole point is that they're going to be turned into a vassal state, and I don't think that's necessarily bad.
No, well, if they're turned into a vassal state, that's great, right? As long as it's a Russian vassal state.
Well, I mean, because honestly, that's what I think is going to happen, and I think it is. It's what should have happened before, really.
Yeah, being a vassal state ain't so bad. Look at all of Europe.
Look, Canada and Mexico are vassal states of the U.S. I mean,
It's sad because there was nothing wrong with the idea of an independent Ukraine if it hadn't been for this banderism.
But that's like saying there's nothing wrong with pit bulls except that they bite.
There are different parts of Ukraine, right? East Ukraine is not West Ukraine.
Right, but the borders were not drawn. The borders for the Ukraine SSR and the Russian SSR were not the borders that ought to have been for post-Soviet. The post-Soviet borders ought to have been different, redrawn.
Yes. Well, they believed that would help keep Ukraine politically under control.
The war has resolved that issue for the most part.
Well, we will see if and when, I think months from now. I'm with Mark still. I'm still waiting to see one big push in the summer before Putin says, okay, guns down. Just
that could happen.
Not yet. Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Mark and I are wrong.
I think that it will likely be, if the Kiev regime military crumbles, then it will be just one big push. If it goes on, then it could go on for considerably longer.
Well, it will crumble if Trump,
Snip, snip.
Yep.
Yeah. But
snippity snip.
I mean, let's be honest. The two things that Trump has done in the last week, right, since Putin gave that's a nice idea, but no to a ceasefire, right? What did Trump do? They put new sanctions on Russia's oil and the banking sector, right? Or by not extending the exemptions, right? And they sent new, improved, supposedly electronic warfare-proof ground-launched small-diameter bombs to Ukraine, to the Kiev regime, right? So that was a military and an economic escalation, a little bit of stick coming from the Trump administration towards Russia. And that is not a smart move because, first of all, Russia doesn't take well to threats. And second of all, if that's all you got in the way of threats, Russia's not impressed.
Yeah, I think obviously the Russians are winning. The West is finally admitting it. We know that's the case. And the spoils of war go to the victor. And so do the terms of, when the war is over. So I think this is where we're at. So if and when the war comes to an end, it's going to be up to Vladimir Putin to dictate and nobody else. The Europeans keep insisting that we're going to have a say in all of this. It's like your children, when your family's deciding on, what to buy at the grocery store or like take a family vacation, or the kids are like, no, we want to go here. Okay, that's nice. Shut up. We're going to Disney World. Like that's all you got.
They don't accept that they have lost this war yet. And if it on the battlefield and going into the future, it becomes impossible for them to deny, then the narrative will be Trump lost this war for us. We would have won it anyway, right? That will be their narrative.
So funny. So silly. But the phone call happened. We reviewed it. Nothing happened. It was a long 3 hours of translation.
Myself, I figure that of those 2.5 hours, right, that 2 hours of it was probably Trump bragging about how big of a mandate he has and talking about which states he won in the U.S. And then Putin giving him a lecture on the Ukrainian history of the pull-up sea people of the Crimea, and so on. Right?
That
he
is
went
probably
into 800 years of history. Trump was bragging about how he crushed Kamala Harris. So that was probably about 2 hours right there.
Did you see his message to Hamas where he threatened them? Right. And it was either Hamas or the Houthis. One of his threatening Truth Social posts. And in that letter threatening to, I think it was the Hamas, actually. He bragged about how big of a mandate he has in the United States. I'm like,
yeah, I saw that.
I'm trying.
All caps.
The Hamas leaders are probably like, what does this mean? Is this?
I really think we're right about the first 2 hours going to that stuff, like Vladimir Putin going into 800 years of history, Donald Trump going into his 2024 victory, because the aides kept running in and out of the White House and telling the press, all they would say was, the phone call is still ongoing. It's going very well. And that's all they would say. And for me, having been at the White House, having reported from the White House, when the aides come in and out and say things like that, it's because some bullshit minutia is happening that's irrelevant to anything else. Totally irrelevant.
There was two very different assessments, right? Because the reading from the White House was, it went very well, which is quite a different from Trump's normal, it was wonderful, it was huge, it was the best thing in the world. Meanwhile, the Russian assessment of it was they had a frank exchange of views on Ukraine, which is usually diplomatic code for completely different policies and opinions, right?
Right. It was code for meh.
Yeah.
That's what it was. The Trump White House said, it's still ongoing. Talks are still ongoing. This is, every half hour you have a guy or an aide coming out in and out saying, still ongoing. Things are going very well. Still ongoing. It's going smoothly. And then you get the Russian perspective of, the translation is, it was all right.
It could have been worse.
Well, it's all right.
We shall see.
All right. Mark Sleboda, our buddy, thank you so much for jumping in here to give us your analysis of this all right phone call.
The very, very good, perfect phone call, the best phone call.
No, it wasn't the best phone call.
No one's ever seen such a phone call.
He didn't say that this time. They just said it was an all right phone call.
Which is why I say that maybe it didn't go as well,
Right. It was just a good phone call. So Mark Sleboda, thank you so much. Mark is an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on his Twitter at Mark Sleboda1, the number 1, and on his YouTube and his Telegram channel. We've put it down there at the bottom of the screen. It's the same name,
Substack
The Real Politic.
Don't bother with YouTube. That's a censored platform.
Substack and Telegram, The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. spelled right there like that. And on Facebook at Gramsci /Gramsci, GRAMSCI. Mark Sleboda, always a blast, of course, and we'll have very excellent, fantastic, wonderful conversations, the three of us.
Always.
The best.
Always.
No one's
The
ever
best,
seen such conversations.
Have a good one, guys.
Mark, thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks for staying up late, Mark. Bye.
All right. So, all right, guys, that is going to do it for Ted and I for this 100th episode.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Big 100. It's so big that we're taking this morning off and we're not even here.
Yeah, that's true.
But guys, make sure you guys like and follow this show so we can keep doing another this 200th show.
Yep.
That's the only way we can do it. We can only do this if you guys help us grow, and by helping us grow, we mean you hit the like button, you subscribe, you follow, and if you're in the financial position to do so, donate either by joining on what do they call it? On Rumble, it's the subscribe button where in the chat where you can become a monthly member, and then on YouTube. Oh gosh, this is where we need producer Robbie, because I don't know all the language for it. But on YouTube, you can become a paid subscriber as well to donate to the show to help us get this show up and running. Because right now we're running on the fumes that Ted and I started with of our own.
And we're gasping for air.
So there you are. Yeah. Seriously. But we'd appreciate your help in spreading the word, getting us more clicks, organic clicks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your sister, tell your cousins. We'll be back on Thursday. So thank you guys for tuning in. Adios, amigos. Bye.
Thank you.